Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another episode of In the Frame. Today's episode are films that deserve sequels, but I'm happy they didn't get one. As we know, sequels are usually, you get diminishing returns. Usually the original director doesn't direct the sequel, so sequels sometimes lose the feel of the original films. These are basically all genre films I've picked, and some of them come from literally literary sources, from either comic books or books of fiction, so there is actually more in a series, but for some reason they didn't get sequels. But again, even though they deserve sequels, and I would quite happily watch the sequels, fortunately they didn't actually get any, because let's be honest, they probably wouldn't have been good as the original films. Obviously this is just a bit of fun, so I would quite like to see your own films that fall into the deserve to have sequels, but I'm glad they didn't actually get one, because it probably wouldn't be very good. So the first one is 2012's Dread. This is a lovely little lenticular steelbook from Nova Media. This film is 10 years old already. Who would have thunk it? This pretty much came out of nowhere. It's very much like the next film I'm going to mention. It's very simple, very straightforward, and obviously a lot better than the Stallone Dredd. Because one thing about Judge Dredd is he doesn't take his helmet off, and of course in the Stallone one he takes his helmet off for most of the film. This is Karl Urban, and very much like the comics, it just follows Dredd on a normal working day, as he goes to an overpopulated high-rise in Megacity 1 with a rookie. They get caught and trapped by Lena Headey's rather impressive central villain, and they pretty much just have to survive, and that is essentially the plot. It did come out, I believe, roughly around the same time as The Raid, and it's essentially the same story, but it's actually Dredd done properly. I'm sure there was talk of sequels, but again, they would probably try and expand it and flesh it out, and that would miss the whole point of Dredd, because again, the 2000 AD comics was basically following Dredd on his day-to-day. There was no, well, apart from maybe Judge Death, there was no real super villain. It's basically just life in Megacity 1, and Dredd really did the job. So it probably deserved another visit to that world, but I'm glad they didn't do it. The next one is a slight cheat, I suppose, but it's Mad Max Fury Road, which again, like Dredd, is really simple, but it's simple and effective. There is a prequel coming out, so it's not technically a sequel, about Furiosa, Charlize Theron's character, even though I don't think it's going to have Charlize Theron in it. It's a younger Furiosa story, so it's not actually a sequel, so this still counts. Hard to believe this is 7 years old already. Again, I've done a video on Fury Road as far as I kind of thought it was okay the first time I saw it, and then I can literally just watch it once a week now because it's just so watchable. Ridiculously simple. Everybody goes that way, and then everybody goes that way. But it's just a wonderful thrill ride, so simple. Again, people complain because it's not a Mad Max film, because he's just a side character, but people kind of forget the first two films. He was kind of just interjected into a wider story. But yeah, probably deserved a sequel. Glad they didn't actually do one. They certainly probably couldn't do one with Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, because apparently they both hated each other during the shooting of it, and it's a miracle it was ever finished. Next is one of my favourite films of the last 10 years, even though it really shouldn't be. It's The Nice Guys, written and directed by Shane Black, and with Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling. Two actors I'm not that high on, but we'll see one of them later on the list as well. But this is just so good. Again, I picked up the second sight special edition of Drive with Ryan Gosling, and as soon as I finished watching it, it's like, I really want to watch The Nice Guys again. These two have perfect chemistry. It would be wonderful to have them back in that world again, but would Shane Black do it? It would end up being somebody else that would do it, and it just wouldn't feel the same. It has a real set in the 70s, and it has a kind of real 70s kind of vibe of another film that's on this list. But the chemistry is wonderful. The actress who plays Ryan Gosling's daughter is fantastic, and not one of those annoying kids in a film. It's nuanced. Keith David's in it as a heavy. It's just an absolutely wonderful caper detective film. Two wonderful performances by Gosling and Crowe, and certainly deserved. I don't think it was a success just because it was fantastic, but deserved a sequel. But I'm kind of glad they haven't done one, because it's not going to be as good. Next, Devil in a Blue Dress with Carl Franklin, who followed up the sensational One False Move with another great film from the 90s that doesn't get talked about enough. For me, it's Denzel Washington's best film. This is an example of, based on books by Walter Mosley, the central character Easy Rawlins, played by Denzel Washington. So there's different books featuring Easy Rawlins. So there could have been more films featuring Washington as Easy Rawlins, which I would prefer to watch rather than endless Equalizer sequels. But this is so very much like One False Move, so assured, so beautiful, takes its time, expects the audience to actually pay attention, has a wonderful mood. It's a great film about friends and friendship as well, apart from being a noir. Great period, great place, and sense of place and period. Should have had another Easy Rawlins installment, but kind of glad they didn't, because it probably wouldn't have been directed by Carl Franklin. Who knows, Denzel Washington might not have done it, because he would have went on to bigger and quote better things, or more successful things. So maybe not. The Long Goodbye with Elliot Gould, obviously playing Philip Marlowe, and obviously there's a series of Philip Marlowe books that Elliot Gould could have reprised the role in, but again, Robert Altman doesn't tend to repeat himself that much, so Altman wouldn't have been involved. It has a weird kind of sense of, yes, it's set in the 70s, but Elliot Gould's Philip Marlowe is still almost in the 40s or 50s. The same way The Nice Guys is obviously made in 2016 or whatever, but is set in the 70s, but there's a different kind of feel. This one has a strange kind of feel of time and place as well. I could watch Elliot Gould as Philip Marlowe again, but it probably wouldn't have been good because another director would have probably made it. So that's another one that we could have seen Elliot Gould and Philip Marlowe again, but it probably wouldn't have been as good. Next is one of the films that's in the conversation for my favourite film of all time. Flash Gordon, again, Mike Hodges. It was supposed to be Nicholas Roeg. Mike Hodges, who hated science fiction, delivers this masterpiece that's better than Star Wars, as I've said before. It literally ends on a cliffhanger for a sequel, but because it was a bit of a box office disaster, it never got a sequel, which is probably just as well, because this is very much like the lightning in between Flash and Gordon. This is lightning in a bottle. Again, a director who wasn't really interested in the subject matter, but just shot it with, again, it's a searing documentary on life on Mongo under the dictatorship of Ming. Looks absolutely beautiful because Dino De Laurentiis, his favourite colour is red, so it's very red. And Max von Sydow is just absolutely amazing as Ming, having a glorious time as a sadist. And again, could we had a sequel? Certainly, but pretty glad we didn't, because it's just about perfect as it is. Next is a case of a film that, if it had been successful, it might have replaced the trilogy that the director went on to make shortly afterwards. It's Deep Rising with Treat Williams and Famke Janssen and Wes Studi. One of my favourite cheesy hokum. It's an H.P. Lovecraft story that's not actually an H.P. Lovecraft story, about a deep sea monster attacking a cruise ship that's being robbed. This was actually made in 1998, the year before Stephen Sommers made The Mummy, which would be a huge hit. But if this was a huge hit, who knows, we could have had 3 Deep Rising films. The film does end with members of the cast landing on a desert island and hearing big noises because there might be a big monster on the island as well. And Treat Williams does have the wonderful catch line of "Now what?", as he says about 3 times or 4 times during the film. So it ends with their continuing adventures avoiding another big monster, but unfortunately we never got a sequel, even although it's probably better that we didn't. And then Stephen Sommers went on to do highly successful mummy films, which none of them, especially the third one, are as good as Deep Rising. Obviously that's my opinion, and my opinion is not fact. Just a bit of fun. Next up, it's Russell Crowe again. Again, not my favourite actor in the world. But Peter Weir's Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. Again, this is a film based on a book, and there was a series of books following the adventures of Russell Crowe's titular character. This looks absolutely gorgeous. You should really see it on as big a screen as possible. But again, when it came out, nobody was really that interested about a serious film involving big ships. I can't even remember when the first Pirates of the Caribbean came out, whether this was before that. I'm not really a fan of the Pirates of the Caribbean films, but this is just sensationally good and criminally underrated. I could do a Neglected Gems video on it, but I'm talking about it now, so I probably won't. But it's intelligent. The period design is really good. Paul Bettany's very good. Has kind of the foil for Russell Crowe. The action scenes are really well done. And it's just a beautiful film, and it drops you in it and really has a sense of place and time as well. One of Peter Weir's best that doesn't really get talked about And again, it's a series of books, and if this had been a success, we maybe would have got more, with Russell Crowe hopefully reprising his role. But again, in some level, it's better that we didn't, because this one is absolutely fantastic, and who knows, Russell Crowe might have been busy and it would have got recast and it just wouldn't have been the same. So that's Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. Bit of a clunky title, but certainly not a clunky film. Next, The Lone Ranger, with Johnny Depp and Arnie Hammer. Both have had their issues since. Speaking of Pirates of the Caribbean, this was directed by Gore Verbinski, and this was the blockbuster that absolutely bombed, even though it's actually pretty good. The problem is it's a lot darker than people thought it was going to be. It's about the genocide of Native Americans. It's got cannibalism in it. Somebody eats somebody's heart on screen. And it was just a lot darker than people was expecting. This family film, but it's not really a family film. It's got nods to Leone films. I mean, what more could you want? Johnny Depp does have a wonderful last line. And again, who knows, if this had been as successful as Pirates of the Caribbean, we might have had more Lone Ranger films. But again, it's probably a good thing that we didn't, because this one is kind of wonderful despite its problems. But it bombed. And that means no sequels, unlike Pirates of the Caribbean, who I think... Is there 5 films in that series? I think I've lost count. Next, Mario Bava's Danger Diabolique, with John Philip Law. This is from 1968, based on a French comic book. And again, it's just a colourful romp about a master thief. And again, we could have had a whole series of Danger Diabolique films. But again, Bava probably wouldn't have done it, and it would have just turned into something not as energetic, not as strange, because Bava's eye is different from so many directors. Another really influential film from Bava, almost as influential as Planet of the Vampires, or Blood and Black Lace, or Twitch of the Death Nerve. Just colourful, wonderful, bright and breezy, with iconic set design. This is the imprint edition, and it's just absolutely wonderful. And deserves sequels, but kind of glad they probably didn't do anymore. Next is a film I talked about in Turkey Love. It's John Carter, the Disney bomb, that's actually quite good, even if the 2 lead characters perhaps aren't the best in the world. Based on Burroughs' Princess of Mars. I do believe there's a couple more books of these characters, I could be wrong. I think there's maybe at least one more. But it was such a bomb, there was no way they were ever going to do another film, and probably wouldn't have been as good as this one, despite the problems this one has. It doesn't help that the title is one of the worst titles of all time. Princess of Mars would have been better, even though, as you can see on the front cover, the princess is nowhere to be seen. But another, very much like Lone Ranger, another one that's got unfairly treated, just because of its box office. Not a great film by any stretch of the imagination, but as far as Hokum goes, it's a wonderful romp that deserved a sequel, but I'm glad they didn't actually do any. And finally, Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter. This is a late Hammer that was probably ahead of its time or before its time. Certainly out of time, about a vampire hunter who's a soldier back from the war. An enigmatic performance by Horst Janssen, but really odd, strange, and wholly wonderful. that if it had been successful, I think the plan was to make more Captain Kronos films as a different generation to Van Helsing, and they would have been a lot of fun, but again, it wasn't successful. And as we know in films, if they don't make a buck, they don't really revisit them. But there should have been at least another Captain Kronos film, but again, kind of glad there isn't, because it probably wouldn't have been as good or odd or as strange as the original. So again, that's just a bit of fun about films that deserve sequels, but I'm kind of glad they never actually got one. But please let me know in the comments which films you think deserve sequels, but secretly you're kind of glad we just have that one hour and a half or 2 hours of perfection that they could never really repeat. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.